Good evening and welcome to Samtalekøkkenet. My name is Henrik Vestergaard Friis, and besides Samtalekøkkenet, I also please come in. We're prepared with the food. Or Sonia has prepared food for you. Yellow peas. Please suit yourself and take once more. It's with meat or with smoked tofu. So with or without. And there's also beer to come along. I would recommend the classic beer. It's best for the food. And there's snaps on the table, all ecological. So please, suit yourself. Besides making Samtalekøkkenet, I'm also a performing artist, and I've spent the last 5-6 years in reconstructing the Danish canon for culture. I won't say more about that, it would take quite long.
There are links to our own work in our homepage if anybody would be interested. But that's not what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm Ellen Vestergaard Friis. I'm married to Henrik. We moved back to Denmark from Berlin a couple of years ago, and do I need to speak up? Okay. And we realized that some...
You have to say hello and you are.
Oh, sorry. Yes, with us tonight we have Jørgen too.
Hi.
Jørgen Burmester. You want to talk about it?
Yeah. Hello. I'm Jørgen Burmester. I am a performance artist, and I'm also an organizer of performance art, mostly around an organization in Berlin called Performer Stammtisch. Some members here tonight, which is a rather loose-knit network that organizes monthly meetings of performance artists where we meet and present work to one another mostly, and of course guests are welcome, but it is sort of an artist for artists, no budget, no profit kind of thing. I'm also a member of the organizing committee of the Month of Performance Art, which takes place now in May for the second time in Berlin. And it's become rather big within 2 years. It's also in Berlin, therefore it's also no budget, but it will include more than 50 performances and a few hundred performers this year. And it is something we Performer Stammtisch do together with a lot of other organizers and curators around the city. So everybody just does their program, and we just umbrella it under this heading of Month of Performance Art. So there will be a pretty big variety of performances, festivals, and other things going on in May. Yeah, that's maybe my two main things besides my own artistic work that some of you are probably familiar with because I've presented at Samtalekøkkenet several times.
Yes, so my name's Christopher Hewitt. I'm also based in Berlin, but I'm actually here on a 3-month residency, and then I'm coming back to Copenhagen for another residency in August and September. So I'm here for a little while. I'm also somewhat involved in performance art, but more as somebody who is involved on the edges of performance art. I'm not an artist myself. One thing I obviously do is I document, and I also publish a publication called Live Artwork DVD, which is just collections of performance art documentation.
Last thing, maybe before we move on, you say a bit about yourself. Then we have to say that this is the program for today. First, a small introduction, that's where we are now. 10 minutes or something, 15 minutes. Then we'll talk a bit about these 6 artists written here. And then we'll go over to review the 3 performances of Hallo Earth, Sofie and Lynch company. And that will be an open discussion. So if you have anything to add on, you're welcome. That should be around 7 o'clock, and it should take half an hour. For those of you who would like to, and if there's more beer, you're free to hang around and empty the beer and keep the discussion with us. And I have to say thanks to Mute Company for lending us their beautiful room. They played yesterday here and have a new premiere in 2 weeks. And there's invitation for most people here, not everybody, placed over there. So please take an invitation and go to their performance.
A bit about Samtalekøkkenet. I don't know if all of you have read our folder. Well, to tell you a bit about the background, why we started this, and also what we normally like, because this is a special edition for IETM, what we're doing here tonight. And we moved back from Berlin a couple of years ago and realized that a lot of young art people, visual artists, were starting to adopt approaches from the theatre, like playing with roles, identities, and monologues and fictions. But they didn't really seem to have a language, a discourse about it, a way to develop it along those lines, the theatre. And at the same time, there seemed to be a generation of theatre that was not really experimenting. I mean, the people who are experimenting the most in the theatre in Denmark seem to be from 35 years old and older. Of course, there are exceptions, but this was the general image. So we decided to let these two groups meet each other and to have a forum where people could discuss what they're doing, because discussion, we think, is essential to development, and also to that this fear of criticizing other people, that's the fear of being criticized, and we wanted to overcome that. And at Samtalekøkkenet, means the dining kitchen, the discussing kitchen in Denmark, we give people a free meal, and this is a small trick. It's not necessarily that much. It's not enough to really fulfill a big compliment like Henrik, for example. But it's a little trick that redefines the situation from being a place where you are a passive audience to a private, homely feeling. So you get this feeling that you are invited and that you are invited to participate. So it completely redefines the situation. We don't normally give away the drinks, but that's another matter. The entrance is free, the food is free. And we normally have about 4 artists presenting their work in excerpts, or maybe sometimes just the ideas, the big lines of what they do, and sometimes whole performances from the theatre, from the sometimes of course, performance art or interdisciplinary art with performative elements. It can be all of those things, and the people will present here in a little while have all, except for one who will be at a common Samtalekøkkenet, have all been here already at our Samtalekøkkenet, participated in it, and it's people that we like and would like to promote. And it's the typical evening, about 4 performances, dinner, a lot of discussion, a very nice, agitated, intense feeling about it. And it's about once a month. In our homepage you can see all the documentation from the about 15 nights we've had so far since the beginning of 2010. Yes.
Tonight will be a bit different because we don't show live performance on itself. We haven't created anything. We're invited here to IETM and to comment on some of the program here. So we haven't chosen freely. We want to this performance out of this artist and this artist. We are trying out a kind of new format here that we call Samtalekøkkenet Take Out, which we're trying for the first time tonight. We're doing it in Berlin in 2 months' time, and at Roskilde at a performance art festival there, where we come there, go there, and spend the time and talk about the works being present on the spot. When we say talk about the performance, it is quite essentially that we don't go to the point to make harsh criticism or anything. We try to make constructive criticism and go back to the ideas and say, where could this have taken the work? Where could this work have developed? And is there necessary a link between the original idea and how the end expressions look like? It's more difficult for us here because we haven't chosen the work ourselves, so we cannot be as harsh as we normally are. We have to be a bit more polite, which you might see in a while. Normally we can be quite hard, and we can have some really hard discussion about the works going on. But that would be a bit different tonight. Because we were invited to here and saw the program, which is mostly dance. And even though I trained ballet myself, we don't know much about dance. So we don't yet go and criticize dance because it's really not our field. We might do it next year, but we're not there yet. Where
I want to say something to that.
Okay.
I mean, we focus on conceptually based work, and if there's no way, of course it can be dance as well.
Yes.
I mean, the main point is that it has a concept, an idea as a starting point, and this makes our audience very diverse. Our audience members normally are from literature, from dance, from theater, from the universities, aesthetical studies at the universities, because everybody is able to discuss the idea and how it's developed. So we are not discussing the form, we're discussing the content. Yes.
Yes.
And for the 3 pieces we've chosen here at the IETM, we've also chosen pieces that are not taking place in theatre spaces, where the artists have consciously chosen to let it happen somewhere else.
We're not against things happening in the theatre, but it should be a decision taken because of need to go into the theatre and ask questions to the theatre. If a show is just playing in the theatre because it's the most convenient thing to do, we wouldn't review it. If there's a need for going to the theatre, beyond just being convenient and nice to go there because you have technique and all that kind of stuff, we would review if it's beyond that. If there's a need for using the theatre space beyond just the technical and the easiness of it. So we have chosen 3 works that is outside the theatre because they seem for us to be the most fitting into the kind of stuff we normally work with. And that is the Hallo Earth. Did anyone see the Hallo Earth piece in here? One? Then it was the Sofie, okay, 3, 4. Then was the Sofie Lebech. Did anyone see that? Yes, 1, 2, 3. And it was the Stuart Lynch Dreyer thing today. Anyone? Okay, so we will have a discussion. But of course, you're all very welcome to come in, because what we'll do today, we'll try to talk about these performances in more general terms and perspective them through other groups that do similar things. So even though you haven't seen the performances, you should be able to participate in the discussions. But before going there, we will make an introduction of 6 artists that 5 of them have already been in our kitchen, and the 6th will come soon.
Yeah. I'm starting with Seimi Nørregaard. I think we'll just start.
Yes.
And Seimi Nørregaard was educated from an alternative theatre education here about Seimi. It was middle of the 90s, I think. She made this piece here. It's in the other building here in Carlsbad, and created an installation that was about 4 times the size of this room, all by herself. In a matter of a few months, she wrote the text, she performed, she did everything herself. A huge work. But this element of doing everything herself is actually also, I think, very telling of what her work is about, because it was an installation that kind of looked like a home with different, this was the kitchen situation, and she spoke to the audience then in the way that children speak when they play, you know, the special play grammar. Then you were the dad and you went to work and I stayed at home. You know, that kind of, when children play, they speak that way, they delegate the roles. And she spoke to the audience in this way, and it made you unsure if she was presenting you with a kind of poetry-like text, or if she really wanted you to participate. So some people did participate, some didn't, but both things were possible. From here there was another room, a bedroom, and you could lie down in the bed. Then suddenly the person lying down in the bed was sucked out, and it became kind of a very sad feeling of loss, of losing somebody, of death. There was a huge torch of Christmas trees in this installation. And it was all in this, it was all like a child was playing on a big scale, a real big scale. And that was,
you have to say a thing about the part of participation, because there's quite a lot of help me, Christopher. Participatory theatre around where you're forced to play that role or that role or that role. Seimi did that in an extremely polite way. Please come inside and grab a beer and something to eat or take a snaps. Yes. She did it in a very nice way. We were hosted very nicely, so you felt welcome. You felt that you felt taken care of the whole way, even though I was forced to cut potatoes. But it was done in a very nice way, so I never at one moment felt used or anything at all. It was a very, very nice feeling. I have a problem with this participatory theatre, being forced to do this or that. But the way Seimi used it was kind of exceptional, that you were taken care of at the same time as you were part of it. So it was kind of double layered, which made it extremely elegant.
Yeah, it was an invitation to play, basically.
Okay, I'll talk about another performer called Olof Olsson. He's originally from Sweden, Olof Olsson, but he studied here at the Royal Art Academy in Copenhagen. And Olof is he's the master of speech. What he's doing he's normally speaking a lot and talking a lot, and he can talk about everything. He did a couple of performances where the performance audience couldn't ask him anything, and he would give a good answer to it. And he did a couple of talk shows where he talks about everything and nothing. So he's not a spoken word artist. Again, you had a good word for it, Christopher.
When I saw his performance, I thought of a term. An eccentric monologuist, because he's really when he is talking, is quite eccentric, somewhat obsessive kind of themes, I guess.
Yes.
I think the final piece of the Art Academy was about 6 pages of the protest against the rules for the examination. So he really uses this form of the language to artistic meaning.
But it's mostly the spoken language that is his field. Which please come inside. That is his field. When he speaks, he's brilliant. It's kind of paradox that we showed here without sound. But the reason for that is this piece that we invited to Samtalekøkkenet was called The History of Disco. And after this short introduction, he actually doesn't say a word for half an hour. He just plays his favorite disco records. And is standing there. And as you can see in the short moment, he is a brilliant performer. He doesn't need to do much. He's simply there. He simply has it what it takes to deliver it. And that is kind of, hello, welcome, come inside, grab a beer, take something to eat, bring all our snaps. Please have a snaps, all of you. It's good for the discussion. What these 6 people we are presenting have in common, they are all very good performers. Besides they're making very conceptual work, they are also good performers. If I ever have the options that might never have to stage Ibsen or something like that, I would definitely put Olof and Seimi in it, and all the other 4s. But this thing, he was presenting his favorite disco records, playing them, just standing around, doing a little bit with the head, and people were spellbound for half an hour. After half an hour, he started talking, and once he gets starting to talk, it's difficult to get him to stop, so he's actually talked for an hour after that. But you can see it all, it's on our webpage, and you can go and see it. And he's really, I would trust that man anything. You could invite him anywhere, and he would do a brilliant show. So if you're in need for a good performer, he would definitely be your man. Anything more to Olof? Do you have anything to add on?
No, I agree. It's fascinating. If you could, I don't know, does this series of talk shows continue?
He's doing it in Berlin now.
Mm-hmm. So that is, I think this obsessive monologuing is it best as a talk show host. Of course, he has guests, but he's not very nice with guests. So when he thinks of something that he just needs to say, he will cut off his guest in the middle of his first sentence and just deliver a monologue that might last up to 10 minutes.
Come inside, please. No, you can also stay there, that's fine. Whatever. Good. Next.
Stine Jacobsen, another one of these young visual artists from the Art Academy. She is really truly an interdisciplinary artist. So she's working in a lot of media, and she likes to investigate the existing mass media. For example, she was living in Los Angeles for a while, and she realized that her neighbor was looking exactly like Richard Dreyfuss. So she asked him she went over there, knocked at the door, and said, "Do you have time to kill me today?" And then she made this movie over and over, going on a drive with this neighbor and being killed in various ways, and filming this, making a movie out of this. And for the subject that we were shown here, she hid over the room where we were, and she had a draw her action. She was performing singularly just for him, and he was drawing it. It was sent live with a camera projection on TV, and we would sit there for 20 minutes, half an hour, just guessing what she was performing. And at the end, we were all covered in popcorn falling down when she came down and presented it. But what she essentially does is a third example, she was, there's this magazine in Denmark for old ladies, people in the countryside, so on, and with little romances, suspense stories. And there's always some kind of drawing of a beautiful young lady and a good-looking man in the background, and she posed for this drawing. So her face was used, and then she exhibited the whole story about how she was participating in this story. So she is using herself through what a trivial mass media to a drawer, a magazine, a movie. Really very interesting girl who is right now in a couple of years resident in Berlin.
You want to say something about this, please?
I already did, didn't I?
No, you didn't.
Yes,
You did? Where am I?
No more beer for you.
I can really recommend the snaps. The Holunder snaps. I don't know what is Holunder in the image?
Yeah, the snaps is from the small island between Denmark and Sweden. It used to be a Danish island, and now it's Swedish. And it's part of this new Nordic food where people are getting interested in what things and foods are coming from in Denmark and the Nordic countries.
Is that the Holunder snaps?
Yeah.
Yes. So Holunder, what is Holunder in English?
I don't know.
Curry?
Yeah, there's no translation. It's like a
Okay. It's extremely good, and it's ecological, so please taste. Even though it's warm, that's a good thing about snap. When you buy good snaps, you can drink it warm. So please have a taster. And I said it's good for the discussion. You cannot recall what the opponent said, so you can just blab on. Okay, the next artist is Jette Hye Jin Mortesen, correct? Yes. She's again from the Art Academy and was graduated 2 years ago, something? Yeah, 2 years ago. And this is actually her final work for the Art Academy. Jette grew up close to the Odin Theatre and is very inspired by Odin Theatre and Kotowski and Artaud, and is in some kind of special way trying to transform that into visual art. And as you can see, it's quite different. It has quite a different aesthetics than Kotowski's performances, but she feels very obliged to his work, but has taken it on a completely different level. And she's one of the artists. What the reason for us being interested in these young visual artists is there's quite clear there's a movement in these visual artists to reach for the theatre. They can see some things in the theatre that interest them a lot, about repetition, about being a space-time and being live, present, and all that kind of stuff that we as theatre persons are quite familiar with. But for the visual artists, this is new territory, at least in Denmark. And as you probably already know, Denmark is a quite small country with a few directions. So for these visual artists, it's quite interesting to go and see what can the theatre actually offers for a performative work, in this case for a video work. Jette is normally, or very often, at least again in Denmark, in visual art, if you're working in groups, there's two ways of working in groups. It's totally chaos, where everybody is doing what they want to, or it is quite hierarchy, so there's one deciding what the other do. What at least in the free scene in Denmark, there's a low-level hierarchy, where maybe there's somebody at the side, but it's more soft. People can have their saying and doing what they're doing, but still there's a boss who takes the last decision. But it can be quite often a soft hierarchy. And she was interested in this soft hierarchy in the free scene in Denmark, or at least that's what some theaters offer. So for this production, she took the decision what it should be about, but then handed out the aesthetics to, in this case, a firm that normally produces video for MTV and stuff like that, and asked them to make her final work. So she's giving away her power and let other people take the decision over her own works. So the people who have made this video, make all the final cuts, deciding where to film, etc. She didn't control it. She gave the control away. Again, when this piece is exhibited, she's not interested. Of course, she's interested, but she doesn't go in and say, I want it to be exhibited exactly like that. The curator can put it any way the creator thinks it's good. So she's quite open to that. More to Jette?
Maybe say a little bit about other projects she's been doing.
Oh, she's been doing a very lovely piece called Sliding Doors. Jacob?
Yes.
This is Jacob from New Company. Are you leaving us? Thank you for letting us have your room.
You're welcome. Please stay and come back.
And as said in the beginning, you have premiere when?
14th of April.
Yes, and as said in the beginning, there's an invitation over there. Please take one and come up, 14th of April.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you. It's called Blackout. It's that poster over there. It's the last part of a trilogy. I'm sorry, just take the word. Dealing with the three biggest illegal economies: sex, weapons, and drugs. So this is the finale with the drugs. Live music and dances.
Great.
Down here. So please come back. And I'll see you around.
Yes. Okay. Jette, the piece after this was called The Sliding Door, or Doors. She wrote her own autobiography in years, and then went to Hollywood with this manuscript, and picked up a few of Hollywood's C actors and got them together in a room and let them play out her life. So she actually, and then she made a movie out of it. These C actors playing out her quite badly manuscript and made a very interesting movie about it.
29 scenes, one for each of the years.
Yes. This one?
Yeah. Lea Porsager. She hasn't been at Samtalekøkkenet yet. We are inviting her for the fall, where we'll have this purely Nordic fall. Time in the fall with only Nordic artists discussing how come that alternative theatre, live art and performance art look so different in the Nordic countries. And Lea from the Art Academy as well, about the same generation as Stine. And she's very interested in what do you call it, in esoteric phenomena, as a supernatural phenomena, not as a believer, but simply the history of the different groups that have been about this, Strindberg's interest in it, and this is this was exhibited in a gallery here. It's a kind of an excerpt from a dialogue with a clairvoyant between Strindberg and what's the other guy called? Spiegelberg, of course. One piece, there was another piece called Leap. It was called Playing on Her Own Name, Lea pronounced Leap. And in this, she performed this historical research in a group called The Rope in Paris, 1935, a group of literary writers that they were all women. And they collected around this guy called Gurdjieff, kind of Indian man claiming to be a spiritic medium. And this he translated into a series of, she asked 7 women to be hypnotized as her personally, be hypnotized into believing that they were her, and then to discuss the common experiences that they had of being her. And this was this ended in the exhibition. There was this movie that was crackling, black and white, looking a bit like something that doesn't work, a television that is out of order, and now and then there would be a text. There were some photographs, black and white photographs printed on silver, and it's typical of her work that is so minimalistic. What you see in the end, it's only the traces, like traces that spiritually. And she had this another work where she was tracing lines of energies, also according to a long, detailed historical research that she actually performed. And this is what makes it so performative, I think. It's this extremely interesting performance that lies behind that little bit that you see in the end, this 10% of the iceberg. But reading about it, the whole process, this year of meeting with the 7 women all trying to be hypnotized to become herself, and all the discussion that they have is all written out in dialogues, in monologues, in words. And at an artist talk also, what she talked about it, she said she was also trying to investigate what issues about identity, obviously, but also what happens when you let somebody, let your voice being spoken by other people, speaking through other people like a medium. And this is all, again, I think, very relevant and interesting questions to the theatre. I mean, this basic research into identity and roles and, yeah. So, I think, do you want to add anything?
No, just I'm looking forward to see what she does. As you can see, she's definitely not a performance artist. It's on a much more conceptual scale. So, but for us, it's interesting to try to bring these people into it, get some new fresh blood into the small Danish theatre world, to get some new eyes on it, new ways to do things. So for us, it's interesting to capture a person like that. She has also worked with Gertrude Stein before.
Yeah.
And to get fresh ideas, because as said in the beginning, theatre makers, I'm still a young theatre maker in Denmark, I'm 41, and there's a lack of generation between 20 and 30 in Denmark. There aren't really many young theatre makers in Denmark, and this could be a way to renew the Danish theatre, to put these people into it. I'll go on to, I'll go on to the last one. It's again a visual artist from the Royal Academy, but this time from the Royal Academy in Vienna. He's called Christian Falsnaes, and Christian Falsnaes is out of the hip-hop rap scene in Denmark. He's been there for a year and doing a lot of graffiti, and then he moved to Vienna to study art. And he has been graduated, I think it's 3 years ago, and he's really a big name in Austria and Switzerland, and is incoming in Germany. In Denmark, he was here last year at our Samtalekøkkenet. He's practically unknown, and he was doing this, a small exhibition, and then this wonderful performance at the Acts Festival in Roskilde. In this performance, he made a choreography for us and made a song. And the text of the song consisted of the 10 top tracks, the top 10 titles at the moment. He just picked up the 10 titles and made them into a song. And that is what he's singing. You cannot hear it, but you can go around and hear it if you should feel like it. So he's very interested in it, and he's very interested in putting street art, graffiti into performance art, how to transform graffiti to performance art. And of course there's still resemblance, as you can see in a moment, painting and stuff on this small house, then destroying it and building it up inside the museum's place. So that is kind of his practice. He's also doing different stuff. He's making raps where 50 people are rapping at the same time, or he did a lovely piece where he was the paintbrush, or what do you say, pencil?
Yes.
Paintbrush himself. So he was just stiff, and he asked the people to hold him and to dip him in paint, and then paint with his head. And of course there were some very beautiful pictures coming out of it. But again, he's also a kind of guy he's doing interesting performances, but there comes a result out of it that actually can be exhibited and sold. So again, it's not theatre, but he is close enough for me, and he can really do something to renew Danish theatre, I mean. So he's definitely also one of the younger guys that we wanna fight a bit for. You wanna add?
What was the what I really liked about this performance was like the many layers it had. It was this story of the house being built and destroyed, and the story of the video being made, and the story of the choreography being learned. So there was the participatory thing, the video production, and actually sort of the making of a sculpture, let's say, in the end, where the house is brought into museum. So sort of an act of occupying the museum like a political act, and all these different layers sort of played out in this one work of his. And I found that rather interesting, that it had so many like different things that quite organically played into one. And he, of course, produced a video that is like a music video, yeah.
It's very typical of the Danish artists that were mentioned here, but also of our point that these young, solo artists, they're all handing out the work. They're letting other people do the work. And that's an interesting thing here. it makes the work much bigger than if the person is just performing himself alone. There's definitely this tendency to give it away.
Just watching the video now, it just reminds me a little bit of John Bock, this German guy. I mean, it's different, but it's also this idea that really quite radical and experimental work can also be fun. You know, and I mean, this looks very enjoyable and fun. So, but John Bock, is maybe also a little bit similar.
I'm sure Christian has studied philosophy, and I'm sure he knows John Bock as well, and that is quite a big influence for him to put off this kind of work. Definitely. Any questions or anything before we move over to the next more discursive part? Comments? Anything?
Yeah, well, a bit about this philosophy thing that we had Jørgen and Christopher who were here. Jørgen was our artist resident last year, and we always tried to have this, how can I say, linguistic dimension presented as well as verbal dimension to as a tool to develop works and at the same time to develop the criticism that is caused around the works. It's the two sides of the same thing. And it's also typical of the foreign artists that we have invited as inspiration, that they are people who are in a creative conflict with themselves and using language to a high extent to develop at the caused around the works. So they are artworks that are never really finished but are ongoing processes, and we try to develop a way of criticizing that is also an ongoing process. And I think the old way of criticizing and reviewing has died. I mean, the time where you could read about yourself in the newspaper. So now people want to participate also in the artwork, in the criticism.
So we tried, we've been doing it, we might be doing it again at Samtalekøkkenet, to have the critics of the newspapers present in our Samtalekøkkenet and give a live review of a piece everybody have seen, which was quite interesting to find out where they could go and the limitations of the reviewers. But then again, we also we came to a level where we thought maybe we should look ahead and see what could be the future of criticism. Is that just a description of the piece and then a critic? Or could it be a part of the piece to develop in the piece and use criticism as a tool to develop an artwork? So nowadays we try more to use criticism as a tool to develop the artist's work. So a bit beyond criticism maybe. At least we try to go there. I wouldn't claim that we have succeeded yet, but
maybe if I could say, I guess it's the idea that criticism can be directed towards the artist's process. Yeah. So rather than picking apart a finished piece of work about what's good or bad about a finished piece of work, it's engaging in a critical dialogue with actually the artist's process.
Yes.
Exactly.
Questions, comments, anything?
Well, have you actually done work where the criticism is within it?
We have worked together with a group called Open Dialogue from England, Mary Patterson and Rachel Lewis. And they're doing that very specifically. They're doing criticism, are invited to festivals where they are a live part of a festival. So they try to do it. We did a workshop with them last year and tried that out with two artists, a Danish artist called Trine Suk Glerup, and an American New York artist called Katia Carter. But it was difficult because the artists felt that their limitation was stepped over, that the criticism was going far too far, that it was not the criticism role. That actually it showed out that the two artists were far more conservative than we thought. The artists were they didn't like to have suggestions from the artists what they could do different. So it was really, you have to, it's a specific kind of artist you would need for that, a specific kind of training that you can actually adopt the criticism fast. But then again, from Germany, at least as I haven't studied at applied theater science in Gießen, but I have worked with a couple of people there, like Jørgen, and as far as I get it, there's a criticism is a practical tool being used in performances.
Well, it's called, what the founder of the institute called it, the theory of practice and the practice of theory, which means that we didn't learn any skills in terms of acting or dancing or acrobatics, but we were encouraged to take what we had learned from books and in our seminars directly to the stage and sort of invent new forms of theatre ourselves. And that is where a lot of the present sort of in-between performance art and theatre scene in Germany comes from, as a lot of you probably know, from this institute in Gießen. Like groups like Rimini Protocol, Shishi Pop, or Showcase Beat and Marked, and God Squad. They're also more or less my contemporaries from that school. And yeah, I must say this influences my own work as well. Like to rather exhibit part of the process than to make a piece and then show this several times. But to start a process that might have different parts to it, like writing, making video, live performance, and sort of continue with the same subject over and over again, and sort of see what went well the last time and what could I change, and make it specific for the place where I show it down. But I'm not really here to talk about my own work, even though we were part of the work, as you can see here. Should we just go on with that?
Yes, we do.
Okay, that's pretty smooth bridge. This is the piece.
Shall we just also just remind people that they're welcome to help themselves to food and drink in this second half as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
While we're talking, so yeah, don't
Those
feel
of you who
shy.
have arrived, please take beers.
Klaus?
Just say one comment. Talk about, I have been present at some of my work in a live critic situation, and I just wonder if if you take the critic into the process, is the critic then aren't we just swapping the critic into a dramaturge? You know, most of the people who are doing critics have been educated in the same place. I've been doing for 3 years, some years ago, newspaper critics, and I have no education, but I'm also working as I don't know what, but with different things. And so it seems as if it should still be a critic who is inside. Then it should be. It still needs that the critic must be published somehow along with the process. Otherwise, the critic is just a dramaturge. Then it's because the scary thing about this meeting is that the artist feels. When you say that some of the artists were very conservative, I think it's also this that they want not to be. They get insecure, and the critic, I could feel that for the critic who was reviewing mine live. She was also insecure because suddenly she was facing somebody who she was criticizing and in public.
Yes.
And it has a lot to do with being in a situation where you feel where you can be creative. Both for both parts.
Of course, there's this thing to say to it. If you want to have a constructive critic from a critic, you also have to have critics that you feel comfortable with, and you have an agreement on some kind of level.
Yeah.
And the match with you at Trine might not have been the best we have made.
No, of course that's a tryout.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'll say the difference between being a critic and a dramaturg is that as a critic coming from outside, you're just an eye from the outside. You don't have the pockets in the artwork that the artwork should be good or that you earn your money. You're free. You can say, it's fucking crap what you're doing there. I don't care. You can really go hard in on it.
Yeah.
And without any restriction, because I still have to make my earning with this guy or this group or whatever. So that would be the good thing to have an eye from outside, not somebody that is already in your pocket and should be for the next 3 productions.
So it doesn't have to be a newspaper critic or it's just need the person who comes from outside and who is able to make a critic.
An important thing of open dialogue is trying to find a language that is not journalistic or academic, but trying to find a third language and trying to see criticism as an art form on its own.
And essayistic.
Yeah, yeah. More.
Well, I think we could take critique in a wider sense than just the written criticism in the newspaper. That's just one segment of it. Like my colleague Lea Porsager once went so far as to suggest that we call everything that it is in between performances critique and call it performance themselves documentation. So like again, it's a process-based idea, so that whatever we do is something is already there, we criticize it and see how can we develop it further. And then we sort of put the result of that, the documentation of this process out for the world to see and immediately engage criticizing it again and developing it further. So we could, for a while we worked with this and found it quite productive, that we didn't talk about rehearsals and productions anymore, but only about criticism and documentation. And that worked quite well, actually.
Yeah, one last comment before we go on. I would say one thing, you were, the presentation of you was, I think, the second of our now 15 Samtalekøkkenet. We are also developing this approach all the time. And something that I am thinking a lot about is how much of all this can we convey for somebody the very first night they experience that at a Samtalekøkkenet, because we can feel now after 2 years or so that people know now the way we discuss and how we do it. But it's possible, it should be possible also to convey that a bit faster than that. So this is also part of this ongoing discussion we have about how to do it.
I think actually, I would say, I think you have a very difficult concept of criticism, actually, because a critic is really a judgment, you can say, in the conventional way, the way that we know it today. It's a finished work, it's based on a finished work, or ideally it should be a finished work, that a critic are making some kind of judgment about. And you're talking about an open process with the critic and the artist involved in the same kind of process. And I mean, this is to me not the concept of criticism. This is something else. I don't know what we should call it, but you're trying to meet art with criticism and create something, a new dimension in a way. You're actually, I think in a way you are forgetting the dimension of time in your concept of criticism and artistic work, because criticism and artist work are actually based on a concept where time has stopped. You can say this is a finished work. Yeah, it is like that when you read the paper and when a critic goes to a theater and watches.
Yes.
Yeah, in that conventional. I admit it's a very conventional concept of art and criticism.
Yeah, but either you can now we're in if we should change only the practice, or if we are allowed to change the meaning of the word through the practice. And in the end, what we want to go for is a changed practice, I think, more than a changed word.
And then I think you also have to change the words
yeah,
in a way, because I get confused here, because you're talking about something very conventional. In a way.
Words are also
I mean, I think it's also kind of a normal part of a process, or at least a lot of processes that I've been involved with, is that at a certain point before you have a finished product, you invite people to look at your work and critique it. I don't know, I call that feedback. I guess maybe it's a question of vocabulary, but I think that, yeah, that is essentially what you're getting at. when critique comes in as a part of the process.
But it seems to me that it's the relationship between the artist and the critic that is at stake here.
I agree on what you say, Jens. But the thing we try to push on is the right to be objective as a critic. Try to put that down and take the objectivity away, and that is really subjectivity. And as I recall, when you were a critic, it was extremely subjective. It wasn't ever objective in the traditional way. It was much more actually what we are aiming at, being this, or trying out this subjectivity, a personal approach, or another way, rethinking the work, or thinking with the work.
Yeah, I think this institution of putting the critic into, as a person into the process of making work, like Rina just described, is becoming quite common, especially since more and more groups work without directors. If you as a group work and everybody's on stage, you need what is often called an outside eye, and that is very similar to a critic becoming part of the process. The outside eye is called outside eye because he is not part of the process like a critic, but he's also somebody chosen by the artist who they think can sort of deal with their work and can say something that they might find interesting for the furthering of their process. So I think this nice orderly world that you just described, where there's finished works and then the critic comes and they never meet and just watches the work, that's pretty much over in a lot of the work that the people who are present here do. Of course, it's still valid in conventional theater, that also exists. But these borders are getting much smoother, and that is solving all the time. And I find that quite interesting, actually.
Yes. Yeah. Let's proceed to talking about those three words here at IETM.
Yeah, back to the rabbits. This is a shot taken during a rehearsal, the last or so rehearsal of the piece Life in the Universe by the group Hello Earth. We were invited to go there on Friday before they started presenting it here at the IETM, so we must say what I was talking about now is one of the last rehearsals, and we don't really know if it changed a lot, comparing it to the experience that you are now invited to make. Since very few of you showed their hands when Henrik and Alan asked who saw it, I will begin by you, Sofie. Great.
You can have a snap.
I will start by giving a short description of what we did, what we experienced, trying to be the objective critic in the first part of the thing I do. And this is my first attempt at live criticism, by the way, so please be lenient. And after that, we try to sort of make some points and talk about some interesting points that were touched in this work, in our perception. And I'm happy that two of the group members of the group are here, so whenever you think everything is wrong, scream at me. Life in the Universe, the Copenhagen version, consists of samples from other works by Hello Earth. And actually, you can go through the piece like through a playlist, like through an album of like different titles. First, we were met here by a man with a van, and we were all taken in the van and driven around town to a certain location. That is it still on? Can I reveal everything?
No, it's not on anymore.
So I can talk about anything. Okay, great. So we were taken to Conceptual. Many of you probably know that place, and we're offered a hot soup. Talked a little bit about what this institution, this association is that made this catering. It's like a social place called Junk Food. And when we were finishing our lunch, we were asked one after the other behind the curtain that was in the room. And after we came back, we looked out from behind the curtain. We looked like this. We more or less, almost all of us changed into rabbit suits. and were then handed MP3 players and headphones and sent out in the street, where we were commanded to take a walk around the neighborhood. And there was also this part of like doing almost like a small choreography, like guided by the audio tour. The audio tour is actually also connecting to the next piece we'll be talking about. There was another audio tour that was quite different. So here it was only one of the parts. The next part was the audio tour was over in the middle of the street when we met another rabbit with a bunch of flags. We were all handed flags and then continued down the street a little while longer, like a demonstration of rabbits. And at the end of that, we were invited to go into a cafe, change out of the rabbit suits, and wait there. And then one after the other of us was called out to walk alone down the street where we would meet somebody. We were then individually met by a member of the company, each of us, and asked to close our eyes, and we were led through the, come on in, no problem, were led without seeing on another little walk through the, continued through the city. There was a blind walk. The blind walk ended when we were ushered into a small tent. I was the first one in and was asked to wait, and then after a little while, another one of the audience members joined me in the tent. We were then allowed to open our eyes and found an envelope with a text in a dialogue, like a theatrical dialogue, that we were prompted by something, by the first sentence on a piece of paper to read out with like with the roles, one of us being A, the other one being B. And the end of this dialogue, when we were sort of quite cozy in this little tent with a strange person, we were then guided by the text out in the street again, walked down another block, and were asked to ring a certain bell, and all of a sudden found ourselves in a kitchen where a large family or living community was having dinner, and we were sort of sitting there watching them having dinner, sort of being a slightly embarrassed situation because they had been prompted not to offer us anything, so we could just watch them eating. And this was no problem for us because we already had lunch, but for them it was quite embarrassing. And then a sign appeared outside the window saying the end, and that we should leave. And which we did, and then it was over. So in the program it said about this piece that it should set out to subtly challenge, this is a quote from the program booklet now, subtly challenge and remix the relation to our surroundings and to each other. And a little later in the same text it said what the embedded experience of the spectator becomes the performance. I quoted this right now. So what it is about is really about, like, me as an audience, I become the performer of my own performance. And this is supposed to change the way I see the city. And actually we could say that the piece has roughly, it falls into two parts, and not counting the intro, like from when we set out to go into the street in the rabbit suit, it was, I think, not so much our experience, even though it's of course slightly funny and slightly embarrassing to walk around in a rabbit suit, but it mostly what was changed was the perception of other people, like going around in the street, and of course people laughing at us or looking away or asking us what this is all about. So this was really more like we were actually performers, which is sort of another strange footnote that all of us were actually performers. And we're doing this, so it's probably maybe different if you don't have performance experience to walk around in the city in a rabbit suit. but it was actually like we were putting on a performance for everyone in the street. And this is changing, and it's turned around quite strongly. It's quite the opposite when we then went onto the second walk with the closed eyes. Then the experience, for me at least, completely turned inside, and I really felt my perception change, like putting a lot more, using my remaining senses in order to find some orientation, even though I was guided and I was trusting my guide still, like feeling the street under my feet, trying to listen to sounds, all of a sudden getting a very clear sense of sounds, like the beginning of this blind experience. There was a dialogue that was so clear that I always thought it was part of the piece, like some people talking about a sale, like bartering, like how much is it if I take only one, how much is it if I take all of them, then it's 200, and what's going on like that. But that's not part of the piece, is it? It was just happening, and so senses.
It just happened, yeah.
Yeah. So somehow senses are sharpened, and so yes, there is some sort of different way of being in the city. So yeah, there's no, especially in this blind part. But then again, being a performer, it is not the first time I've done this. This is of course an etude that almost everyone who's involved with any kind of acting or performance education will sooner or later experience. So for me that part, and also this sort of reading of text, reading dialogue, are we getting into character, are we not getting into character? Are our two characters getting close to each other in this tent, or is it us? So these part, almost all of this in the second part more or less felt like a workshop, trying out different models of what one could do in the cityscape. And then going back and sort of looking at all of the different numbers, this is maybe something I was missing, a coherence of these different things. Like the rabbits had nothing to do with the blind walk. The blind walk really not much to do with them. No, actually in my perception nothing to do with dialogue. So it was really like a number of very interesting things to do, but it was like a sort of random collection of them for me in my experience. Yes, please.
I think there was this, for me it was protection, it was the common denominator. Because although I felt immensely exposed in the two strategies, there was also a protection, the protection of fiction, using fiction as a code to protect you in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And from this rabbit thing, you went to, what was it, like
the blind walk, after the little bit in the cafe.
Yes, trusting being protected. And from this into a tent in the cityscape, where you will be protected while you were living out the fiction in the paper. It was about using fiction as protection the whole way through.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was very consistent in that, and it was different ways of using fiction, in order to prove the point to you, even to an extent where you would visit this private family in the end, walking into a private home, and they would be the ones feeling uncomfortable about you being there, because we were resting safely in our fiction. We were part of the play, and they didn't go to the end.
That's an interesting point, because that is sort of a general experience for me in performance. Like once you decide to be the performer, you are always safe. You cannot be embarrassed. Even if I'm naked and standing 20 centimeters from another person, it's not me who's embarrassed because I chose this, because this is what I do as a performer, and then I can sort of deal with the reaction of the other person. So yes, by turning us into performers, we are sort of protected in a way, because there can nothing that can be as foolish or as helpless as to make it put it outside of the performance frame. Yes, please.
For me,
Louder.
For me, a connecting bone of the different parts was the relationships that you were developing with people you didn't know. In the first part, with people you didn't know, but suddenly you find yourself dressed like a rabbit and working with another 5 persons in the city. So this puts you in a very, all the 5 people are put in a very distinct position and awkward. So this is a relationship you develop with these people. And then when you are blind, you have to trust the people who is guiding you. So it's a very different kind of relationship. And then also in the tent, you are, in a way, you develop very intimate. You lie down with another person you just met 5 minutes ago, and you share a very intimate dialogue, although you are reading it. So I found that this was something that was running through all the performance, the relationship with the audience. Since the role of performer and audience is fused, it's just a relationship.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to say something about it. I saw the performance, or let's say participated in it. If I don't make much sense, it's okay. It's just the snaps. It's very strong. So okay, I enjoyed the whole experience altogether. And I agree. I mean, there are already said some subjects that they were there, like the theme of trust and coexisting with people you don't know and do things with them. Trust was a very great deal, because actually you had to trust that this person that is leading you around Copenhagen streets is not going to harm you, because of course we have experienced being blindfolded or blind many times as performers. But it was kind of, scary to be in a city and around streets of the city, listening to all these sounds that come around, and you had to trust the person that was taking you around, not to harm you or whatever. And there were all these things. I mean, there were interesting elements. I found interesting elements in the process, but of course I am a professional in performing arts, and of course I was wondering about some issues. For example, the first one was because for me everything that it is in a spectacle or in a performance or whatever has to make sense of some sort. I'm not saying it in a linear way, but somehow it has to fit. All the little parts and all the little ingredients have eventually to fit to each other, to make sense, to make a coherent context. So I didn't understand, maybe it's my fault, but I didn't understand why the title was Life in the Universe. I didn't get that point. Maybe it's all entirely my fault, but I didn't get it, because actually we were talking about very earthly things and about relations and about the planet Earth and our human beings and so on. Maybe that's why it was called Life in the Universe as an opposition. I don't know, but I mean the title sort of I didn't know what it means compared to what I have experienced. That was the one thing. The other thing was, of course, but maybe it's interesting and it's good that while I was doing all that, I was thinking about what it means to be a performer or a director of a show or a facilitator or whatever, because of course it was feeling really awkward being dressed in these suits and going around Copenhagen. And actually we were the spectacle, and we were and of course it makes you wonder about the responsibility of the one that facilitates that with the audience. Yeah, I understand what Jørn just said before about that he recognized a lot of things being a performer and so on, but I don't take this. I mean, that's not let's say the artist's fault, because it addresses also to a general audience, and some other people that they are not professional, they haven't probably experienced all that, so it doesn't matter to me. That could be great for them or great new experience.
I would say it's better.
And but I was thinking, yes, of course you can always say no, and that's the responsibility and the risk. Let's say the risk, that the artist is taking. That when it is connected with the whole concept of participatory art. That of course the artist is proposing some things, and of course he's taking also the risk of somebody saying no. Or somebody saying straightforwardly, say, I don't do this, or I don't like this, or piss off. So
actually, this happened in our group, and there was no problem. Like,
yeah.
we
And
really
it's fair
relaxed
enough.
about it. None of this like forced participation that Henrik mentioned in the beginning. So if anybody was saying no, it was quite okay.
And it's fair enough. So, still it made me wonder. I just want to share with you one funny episode because I think it's characteristic of what happened. We were 7 people dressed like this, like rabbits, walking around the streets of Copenhagen with distractions, of course. And it was really very funny because, of course, people they were looking at us and we were feeling, And of course they are laughing, or they were asking us things in Danish, and we didn't know what were really asked, but we were laughing. Of course it was meant to also to be like that, so there is this interaction. But it was great because one guy asked us, what are you doing? And there was also a person that was speaking Danish with us. So again, and he said art. And I think it was hilarious. It was really funny because you see these 7 rabbits going around, just a Danish bloke, a citizen, just walking around. So I said, what are you doing? Art. It was. I think it's indicative. And then we had also to carry flags and stuff like that, which was, I don't know if we mentioned it. It was kind of funny. And then the end, for me, it was kind of sudden. I mean, it left me with an emptiness, let's say. Because after all this experience that I was expecting that first of all, I don't know why, but I was expecting something more, and then I was expecting something more compact or something, I don't know, some more intense altogether, or more, an end that will make more sense to me. For me, it was kind of sudden, and that was it. As about protection, because somebody said about protection, yes, but I mean, we lost 2 people in our round. We lost 2 people during this round, and I think there is an issue there too.
How did you lose them? Did they just leave, or did they get lost?
Well, they got lost. And actually, and this is an issue. I mean, it's nobody's fault. It can happen, but I'm connected it again with the general issues of the artistic responsibility towards what he or she proposes to people, to audience to follow. Because, and I was thinking about it, when I was walking, for example, in the middle of nowhere, I had nothing on me, and I was alone in another seat, not my seat. I had nothing on me. I was not scared because, okay, this character with it. I was hoping for the best, and the best happened. I was not lost. But 2 people, they were lost, and they were also foreigners that didn't know what they were. And it was okay, of course, we sorted it out, and everything was okay. But, I was hoping that somebody was monitoring all this process, because...
Okay, yeah.
Just we on our trip this afternoon, we gained somebody. I just wonder whether that was somebody who was lost on the previous.
The day after. Sorry, but it's now actually 7:30. We'll continue, and you are welcome to stay. Actually, our time is up, but we will continue anyway. We have 2 more now to talk about, so let's proceed to the next
then we could go back to a more
And
general
you're
discussion
welcome
about
to
this,
say,
but we need.
of course, afterward discussion with the artist as well.
So, but we need to get to the next two for the people who. Then we could get back to your question or whatever come in. Please remember it, and let's come back to that. But we really need to get going.
It was a very short
Okay,
observation.
please,
That's all. Just a short, which is that a lot of the discussion at the moment is about description of what went on, and I'm minded of when Merce Cunningham first danced in America. The New York Times critic submitted his critique, and it was a blank sheet of paper. And I think that, and then what occurred after that was that people wrote a description of what they saw, and it's because they didn't have an analytic or a critical language to speak about the work. And I just wonder whether we're in a similar kind of phase with this kind of work, that we don't have a critical language at this stage, or we're choosing to describe rather than critique.
Let's go back to that question afterwards. I would like to answer that, but that's a longer answer.
I don't think there is an answer, but I think it's...
yes, there's an answer. There's an answer.
Is there?
Yes, definitely. But let's get back to that.
He has an answer.
Move on with the next performance. Sofie Lebech also just arrived. Thanks for coming. And
yes, I just had to finish the walk.
You just said, yeah, but it's perfect timing.
So I just finished.
So I'm going to talk about Sophie's performance, which was its Cairo walk, or is it Walk Cairo? I forget now.
Walk in Cairo.
Walk in Cairo. So again, just like a brief description of sort of a practical description. So it starts. You go to a theatre space in the Nørregaard region, and Sophie actually personally gives you a headset with a little MP3 player, and then just starts you in one starting place just around the corner from the theatre. And basically, it's an audio performance which you're just experiencing on your own. You're walking on your own with this audio track going on in your headphones. And basically, the proposition of the piece is the audio track is taken from Cairo. It's sounds of Cairo streets. There's a narrative or a dialogue or a text being spoken over it where sometimes certain experiences are described or pointed out. For instance, she will talk about. I think it is Sophie. You were doing the voiceover most of the time. There are a few other voices pointing out. Oh, there's a little cafe here on the corner, and of course you'll be referring to a cafe in Cairo. And then there may or may not be a cafe on the corner in Copenhagen, and the audio track basically takes you on a little walk around this particular area of Copenhagen. Maybe what it is like about a 40-minute walk through quite different little areas, and all the time describing this as if one was walking through Cairo. And slowly, as the walk progresses on the audio level, there's more and more narrative, which is specifically relating to the Egyptian revolution, and there's sort of little stories about people who might have been involved politically in the revolution, and especially as it progresses, you start to realise that as it were, you are approaching the moment of revolution. In this sort of fragmented narrative, which the audio track consists of. So that's the practical basis of it. I mean, particularly for me, what was interesting about it, and it's interesting to talk about this piece after the Hello Earth piece, because of course there's quite a lot of similarities, because they're both what I would call urban-specific works. I mean, they're using the city as a site. And also, in an interesting way, the city becomes the performer as well. You are also to some degree the performer, but the city also takes on as it were a role as a performer. But I think the interesting difference is that Sophie's work is, at least for me, is essentially a much more sort of minimal, more conceptually structured piece of work. I mean, it is essentially very minimal. It is just an audio track, and then it is just you walking as it were, normally through the streets. As it were, it's not as colourful engagements as the Hello Earth people I think we're doing. So, but in one way, it's very much more minimal than the Hello Earth piece. But what I actually found quite interesting is, at least in my experience, I would say that sort of Sophie's work is more sort of subjective. I'd say it has this sort of form of being quite a minimalist form, but it actually becomes quite a subjective experience. I mean, one, because it is just you on your own, walking through the city. But I mean, also the main element that it has a narrative. There is a text, and as I say, so it's a little bit fragmented. But essentially, the text is made up out of more anecdotes. But it is in many ways a relatively conventional sort of theatrical text in some ways. And as I say, there's a narrative which is even sort of moving forward in time towards this, as I say, this moment of revolution. Whereas actually, in contrast, the Hello Earth piece is actually more sort of abstract in some ways on the level of experience. There is no sort of really deliberate subjectivity. You know, there's no sort of specific emotions which I think the actions are trying to elicit. It's very much just what is your, what is your relationship to what that action proposes, the proposal of that action. So when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, it was quite interesting because actually it was almost a little bit opposite to how I was thinking of the two pieces initially. And then I sort of realised, yes, although Sophie's has this, as I say, this quite abstract sense to it, it actually has this very sort of personal, subjective personal element. And although there is something sort of, very personal about the Hello Earth piece, because you're the one dressed up as a rabbit, but as I say, actually, there isn't the artist's voice in such in the very literal way that in Sophie's piece, Sophie's actually literally talking to you, so there is the artist's voice. So this is, I'd say that for me was quite an interesting sort of contradiction from my sort of first assumptions that I had of the pieces.
Anybody who has experienced the walk as well and want to comment on it?
I saw it, and I would like to give a short comment on the description of the performance. So I agree very much with everything you say. The one thing when I go through this urban landscape, I also reckon that it has a history. And there have been also some social events, things happening in this area. You also go through a churchyard. And what I think is very important to add to your description is that the place you're walking, the route you're taking, also has a certain meaning that has some influence, especially if you know this kind of history as I do. To some extent, I cannot keep this history, these social structures, these things going on out of my experience.
Yeah, I mean, and again, just to make it clear to everyone, I mean, it's a very specific route as you're walking through the sort of the slightly more hipster area of Copenhagen, and then it sort of transitions into this. There's this whole sort of little area which is the large sort of Somali population, and then ending up in this in the graveyard. Where you have the real sort of the classic historical figures of Danish culture. There's some famous figures, I think, in that particular graveyard. So it is this. I mean, yes, it's a very deliberate sort of transition from different spaces which have very, very, very specific meanings. I definitely agree. I mean, I say yes, it's not just a random walk by any means.
But also, it's a piece about revolution in Cairo, in Egypt. And the performance actually ends in a spot very close to a place where there's been a small revolution in Denmark.
Oh, right. Yes.
Among the young people.
Yes.
And you don't end there, but you end close to that. And
yeah.
For me, it was impossible to keep this dimension of the play out.
But because that's not, I mean, because I guess I missed that, because that's not sort of explicitly referenced in the text, so that does rely on the local knowledge, but, but again, it is presumably a deliberate choice from Sophie's part, I guess. So this is, there are these, and as I mean, just quickly to summarise, I mean, one of the reasons I think that we're sort of bringing up these works is, I mean, it is this issue of, different approaches to making to sort of theatre or the sense of performance. And I think at some point we sort of talked about how it seems like quite a few of the younger Danish theatre artists or performing artists are sort of choosing to work in more site-specific spaces. They're not working in black box theatres. On one level, just because there aren't any black box theatres which will take this type of work. But, I mean, and that might be a pragmatic reason, but again, I think it's just really interesting how, you know, performative work can work in a sort of site-specific way. And for me, it's interesting because then you have to question everything. You know, there's no sort of assumed structures that you can rely on, which do sort of exist in a more traditional theatre space. And so again, I think for both of these pieces we've talked about so far, I think it's very clear that the artist is having to make lots of different formal decisions and conceptual decisions and constantly define the space they're working in, which is, I think, which for me is a very interesting sort of impulse, and that's actually where there's a lot of strength. So, and I guess because I think now we're going to move on to talking about a piece which is more, you know, was in at least quite a dark space with seats in it, which is sort of more or less a theatre. So,
unless there's any comments, we'll move on. Please.
There's one here. I haven't been on any of the two tours, and I only know one of the producers. So what I relate to now is to the two reproductions in language of these two pieces, and to compare it with the things that I have experienced. And the first one, to me, dealt with so much with the being the performer and being the spectator, and so much with what the audience experienced themselves and what the other person experienced. That sounds like what I have often, if I've been in things like that description, a kind of collapse of importance, because it is so close to about how do you experience to be in the world at all and to relate to other people, that my real relations to other people and the real situations that after some years stay in me very strongly are so much stronger than I've ever experienced in those works that were dealing so much with the turning around of spectators, producers, whereas the other one, the outer walk, it related to an outer thing, which was the history of Cairo or Egypt, which made the room, in my experience, larger than the other one.
Yeah, no, I can again, I think it's a strange level in some ways. Yes, I think maybe the Hello World, it is so much about your experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but, you know, when you're going through it, it's like because things are happening to you. And again, it's weird because in the Cairo walk, I mean, again, it's just you. It's just you're walking in the city. So it's a totally personal experience. But as you say, but it's this level, this more sort of you know, conceptual level, which is this conceptual layer, you know, of Cairo. You know, it's like a Google Maps where you can sort of layer different things on top, and but it's only in your head.
And it's not only about how you feel.
Yeah, it's not about because
your relation to.
Because also, as I say, because it's in many ways this sort of surprise, you know, actually quite traditional narrative in a way. You know, it's creating emotion, creating an experience through an interesting and compelling narrative, you know, through people's stories. So yeah, it's not about you; it's about the story that's being told to you. And everything is just in your head, and that creates, as it were, the bigger space in some ways than the physical experiences which the Hello Earth was maybe more centered on.
But it's the first one which Rabbit was the declared intent was to change our perception. And the second one was, wouldn't you say, was to take us to Cairo and experience what Sophie has experienced there?
I wouldn't say it was, I mean, obviously we'll have to ask Sophie really, but
That's definitely not the intention.
Yeah, I would, yeah.
It's as much about the city that you walk in. It's definitely the clash between Copenhagen and Cairo. So I wouldn't hope that it come across as something that would take you to Cairo, even though of course there is narrative. But I very much understand that this about creating a very authoritative voice and narrative is not a mode for taking you to Cairo, but actually a mode for kind of giving you a space to, if you what is the word in English? If you want to go to say yes to this authority, then it gives you a space to be in a kind of parallel reality while you walk in Copenhagen and make a relation to Copenhagen.
Yeah, I really experienced this parallel world of being two places at once. Yeah. Because at many points, I'm hard to drag into a fiction. I can't read a book, I cannot watch normal theater. But in this case, there was moments where I was dragged into, say, where I actually saw Cairo and then back to Copenhagen. So this comparison between the two cities was constantly, for me, present, and that made it extremely interesting that I was constantly moving on two levels. And I really, that really worked for me.
So that was very much the idea, so the parallel thing and the mirroring of the two things, because it's, of course, Copenhagen you're walking in. And also this part of Copenhagen changed so much. If you're walking a cold day as today where it's empty, it becomes much more a depressive experience with you and the outer reality. And if you're walking on a sunshine day where everybody is drinking beers or whatever they're doing in the streets, it's a very other connection to, of course, the reality and the feeling. Yeah.
Tak, Søjne. Må vi?
Shall we leave into Stuart's and then, because then we can get back to a more discussion.
And the reason for choosing Stuart's thing is that is, in our opinion, again, it's a site-specific work. Stuart deliberately did choose to, he was making a piece about Carl Th. Dreyer. I don't know how many of you have actually seen the film of Carl Th. Dreyer. It's popular. Is there any non-Danes who have seen a film of Carl Th. Dreyer?
What? Sorry.
Carl Th. Dreyer?
I'm sure I have seen one, but I didn't know it was Danish when I saw it, I think.
If you've seen the film of Dreyer, you would have stopped it. But Stuart Lynch did a theater production about Carl Th. Dreyer. And this thing was taken on at the Dagmar Theater in Copenhagen with Carl Th. Dreyer, who is probably, besides Lars von Trier, the most famous Danish filmmaker. He was making film in the 40s, 50s, and the last film in 62. And he was the leader of Dagmar Theater, which is a cinema, from 60 until his death in 68. So Stuart did choose this spot for his performance, and this performance will have premiere in 2 weeks' time at the Copenhagen Pigs Film Festival. So the setting for the performance was really, it was a site-specific choose a cinema, not a black box. Stuart could have chosen to do it in a black box, but it was much more appropriate to show it in a cinema.
Did you, because this cinema has a specific historical connection to Dreyer?
Yeah, I just said. So there was a kind of obvious choice to stage it in there, and of course to show film the whole time. I don't want to go into details about the performance, that would take too long. I would talk on a different level because I think there was only one marking who has seen the performance. Is anybody in here who has seen the performance? You saw the performance, yes. Two. For me, it was remarkable the way Stuart has transformed the rhythm and the atmosphere of the original Carl Th. Dreyer pieces into a theater play. that actually, I personally appreciate, I don't like old films, but I like Dreyer a lot. I really do. And Stuart really, he captured the rhythm of the original films and the atmosphere of the original films in a very, very interesting and good way. I don't want to go into the text or any of that or the acting thing, but the atmosphere, the rhythm was really interesting. And it's interesting that I think the reason for us also to choose Stuart is Stuart has a practice as a performance artist. He comes also from Buto and from very experimental fields. He has been doing a performance at the Performance Dantes with his solo work. He's doing this thing called TST, Theatre Swift Training, which is a lot about improvising and doing that kind of thing. So he really comes from the places where we are, but try to transfer that into the theatre. And it was quite conventional theatre from my point of view, at least what I'm used to seeing in Germany. It was quite conventional, but quite obvious. Stuart knows about atmosphere, he knows about rhythm, and he could transfer that into the theatre. I like that a lot. And about the content, you had a good remark about the content. Why it was, you could still, my question was still, but why do it in a cinema? Because there was no obvious reason when you saw the piece that it couldn't have played in a black box or down here or anywhere. But
yeah, I would say the form did not demand a cinema instead of a theatre. But the content, it was basically a theatre play about the making of a movie. And this was, in my eyes, Stuart Lynch's making of the movie that Dreyer himself never made. That mentioned the whole time of this Jesus movie that Dreyer would have loved to make but never made. And eventually he had to return to Denmark to this very theatre where we were sitting in. So I would say the necessity of this happening in a cinema wasn't that it had to be in a cinema, it was that it had to be in this Dagmar cinema theatre. It couldn't have happened in Palace cinema or in any other cinema in Copenhagen. It was because of this very state that Dreyer was returning to it.
Did you really think so? I don't know. We know that Dreyer, like me as a naive audience, I know that Dreyer was a filmmaker, but I didn't know the Dagmar theatre story until you told me.
I didn't know it until
so I think it could have. It's interesting that it is premiering in the context of a film festival. So film people will be sort of forced to see these figures sitting in front of the screen when they're used to looking at the screen. But so what is interesting here is the relation to the film, and I think it could work just as well in another theatre, in another movie theatre.
As far as I understand, I mean, Stuart will be touring the piece, will be wanting to tour the piece, and I think he intends that it will be shown in other cinemas, but this is obviously this is where it was produced, this is its home.
Yeah, it adds an extra layer, let's say, of authenticity, but you sort of have to know that it is there. Yes,
but it's just not just an ordinary theatre room, movie theatre room. It's also an old theatre movie room, right? It's no cinema. I think that does something to it. It's not, new comfy chairs and so on. It's a specific setup that is related to old movies.
And I think sort of saying that is interesting because of course there's this whole sort of almost chicken and an egg thing, because of course the old cinemas were quite influenced by the look and architecture, the prestige of theatre. And so as you say, like if you read this cinema still sort of does actually feel quite a lot like a theatre, I mean, as I say, it would be really, really weird to see this performance in like your regular, megaplex, 10-screen, commercial cinema. I mean, so it is already this much more sort of theatrical sense because of the nature of old cinema architecture. And also just one little, again, a little formalistic thing, which I have to take, this is a bit, I'm having to sort of take Henrik's word on this, but I found it quite interesting, or at least the possibility that, I mean, he's not just sort of aesthetically or metaphorically kind of recreating a Dreyer movie. He's not, it's not so literal. But I think Henrik was sort of suggesting at some point to me that there's obviously been sort of formalistic decisions made about the actual theatre piece, the actual performance, which are potentially defined by cinematic form. So he's really taking like the actual structure, or the, you know, again, almost like the process of a Dreyer type movie, and using that as his basis for creating the theatrical scene. I say, rather than just a simplistic, sort of aesthetics or whatever. So it's a more sort of, again, formal, sort of structural relationship between how he's creating the play and the form of the Dreyer movie. I mean, at least all this is possibly, we think maybe that might be the case.
Well, I think it's quite obviously so. You can see this tower on the right side, and there's another one on the left side, and it's just like it, and they went through immense length to build and transport this first things to tells anybody who talks to him about these pieces how heavy these things are. They have to move them all the time. And these are full of lamps. And the little red dots you see on the front of it are switches. So actually the actors go to these boxes all the time and turn on and turn off lights, which has to do with Dreyer's, as Henrik also told us, very intricate and precise working with light. And so actually the actors are live on stage creating this lighting mood that is supposedly somehow Dreyer-esque.
Yeah.
And so I think that's quite obviously the case. It's not something we're just sort of interpreting it.
Yeah.
Rather than just retell a movie, like, which has also been done a lot in theatre, like some years ago. It was sort of a trend, everybody was doing it. It is, sort of giving us maybe bits and pieces, like trailers or from the movie that was never made. I wouldn't say he's making the movie, but he's sort of fantasizing his way to almost the point where the making of this movie could start.
And he was realizing in Dreyer theatre.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Comments?
Any more about that?
There's still more beer. There's lots of beer. We can stay here the whole night. And I will, until the beer is gone, I will stay here. There's still snacks. And we'll keep on talking and talking and talking and drinking as long. No, not as long.
I have to be out here. Move around the table.
So maybe we should set a point now. I would say we would really like to speak more with you, but you might have other things to do. If you're up for discussion, come to the table, bring a beer, and let's continue on a more informal way. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much, everybody.